At my 70th birthday dinner, my daughter-in-law stood up, raised her glass, and smiled sweetly before saying, "Here's to Mom, and hopefully her next home has better nurses than we do." The room laughed. Not politely, not awkwardly. They laughed like it was a perfectly acceptable joke. And in that moment, sitting at the head of the table I had paid for, in the house I had owned for over 30 years, I realized something very simple. They weren't joking. I didn't react. That's the part people always expect me to explain differently, but there's no twist to it. I didn't slam my fork down. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even look at her. I simply took a sip of my water, set the glass back down, and folded my hands neatly in my lap. Because at 70 years old, you learn something most people never do. The loudest response is often silence. My name is Margaret Whitmore. I turned 70 that night. A widow for 12 years. Mother of one son, Daniel. Mother-in-law to the woman who had just made that toast, Lindsay. I had spent most of my life building something stable. Not flashy, not extravagant, just dependable. My late husband and I bought that house when interest rates were high and money was tight. We raised Daniel there. Every inch of that place held a memory. Christmas mornings, scraped knees, college acceptance letters taped to the refrigerator. After my husband passed, I stayed. Not because I couldn't leave, but because I didn't want to. It was still my home. Daniel moved back in 5 years ago. At the time, it made sense. He had just gotten married, was trying to save money, and said it would be temporary. Lindsay came with him, of course. She hugged me the first day and called me Mom before she'd even set her suitcase down. I remember thinking how lucky I was. That I had gained a daughter, not lost a son. Funny how quickly illusions can settle into your bones without you noticing. The birthday dinner had been her idea. She deserves something special. I heard her tell Daniel a week earlier. 70 is a big deal. And to her credit, it looked beautiful. The dining table was decorated in soft gold and white. There were fresh flowers, roses, my favorite. Real plates, not the everyday ones. Even candles, though Lindsay always complained about the smell of wax. Family members filled the room. A few of Daniel's friends. Even neighbors I hadn't seen in months. It felt warm, carefully constructed, but warm. Looking back now, I can see the cracks. The way Lindsay corrected me when I told a story. The way Daniel avoided eye contact whenever finances came up. The way certain conversations stopped when I entered the room. At the time, I dismissed it. You don't spend decades loving your family only to suddenly assume the worst. Your mind protects you from that. It softens the edges. It explains things away. They're just stressed. It's a misunderstanding. I'm being sensitive. I told myself all of those things. Until that toast. "Come on, Mom, it's just a joke," Lindsay added, still smiling, when she noticed I hadn't laughed. I turned my head slightly and looked at her then. Really looked. Her expression didn't change. Not even a flicker of concern. Just that same polished smile she wore whenever other people were watching. Daniel chuckled beside her. "Yeah, Mom. Don't take it so seriously. Don't take it seriously." As if being casually discussed like a piece of furniture ready to be moved out was something light. Something harmless. I nodded once. "That's all." And then I said, calmly, "Of course." Because the truth is, I wasn't upset about the joke. I was upset about what it revealed. Dinner continued. Conversations picked back up. Glasses clinked. Someone turned the music on a little louder. But I wasn't really there anymore. I was observing. Listening. And once you start paying attention with clear eyes instead of hopeful ones, things change quickly. I noticed how Lindsay leaned toward Daniel and whispered something, both of them glancing in my direction. I noticed a folder on the kitchen counter that hadn't been there that morning. I noticed how comfortable they both seemed, as if something had already been decided. Later that night, after the guests had left and the dishes were half-heartedly stacked in the sink, I walked down the hallway toward my bedroom. Their voices stopped me. They were in the living room. They thought I had already gone to bed. "We can't wait too long," Lindsay was saying. Her tone had changed completely. No softness, no sweetness. Just impatience. "If we're going to list the house, we need to start the paperwork now." My hand tightened slightly against the wall. "List the house. My mom just turned 70, Daniel replied, quieter. "We should at least give it some time." "And risk complications?" Lindsay snapped. "Daniel, please. The longer she stays, the messier this gets. The facility I found has an opening next month. It's perfect timing. Facility. Not home. Not care. A slot. An opening. Like I was something to be scheduled. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And you said yourself, she continued, she's forgetful. It's not safe for her to be here alone. There was a pause. Then Daniel said something that settled everything inside me into a quiet, solid certainty. Yeah, you're right. I went back to my room without making a sound, closed the door gently, sat on the edge of my bed, and for the first time that night, I allowed myself to feel it. Not anger, not even sadness. Clarity. They had a plan, a timeline, a destination for me that I had never agreed to. And perhaps worst of all, they believed I wouldn't do anything about it. I looked around the room, the same room I had slept in for decades, the same walls, the same photographs, the same quiet history pressing in from every direction. This was my house, my life. My name was on everything that mattered. And suddenly, very calmly, very clearly, I understood something they didn't. If they wanted me gone, then I would leave, just not in the way they expected. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was upset, but because my mind was working. Quietly, carefully. By the time the sun came up, I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't hurt in the way they probably expected I would be. I was organized. The next morning, I followed my usual routine. Coffee at exactly 7 a.m. 2 slices of toast. The morning news playing softly in the background. Routine is a powerful disguise. People see what they expect to see. And that morning, Lindsay expected to see an aging woman who hadn't heard a thing the night before. She walked into the kitchen in her robe, glanced at me, and smiled like nothing had happened. Morning, Mom. Sleep okay? I looked up from my cup and gave her the same calm expression I always had. Very well, thank you. No tension, no hesitation, just enough warmth to keep her comfortable. Daniel came in a few minutes later, already dressed for work. He avoided my eyes at first, which told me more than anything else could have. Guilt has a way of making people look at the floor. Morning, Mom, he said. Good morning, Daniel. I buttered my toast slowly, deliberately. Then I added, almost casually, you both did a lovely job last night. Thank you for the dinner. Lindsay beamed. Oh, I'm so glad you liked it. Daniel nodded quickly. Yeah, it was nice. Nice. Such a small word for something that had changed everything. I finished breakfast, rinsed my plate, and set it in the rack. Then I said something that shifted the air in the room just slightly. I think I'll run a few errands today. Lindsay's eyes flickered for just a second. Errands? Yes, I said. Just a few things I've been putting off. She recovered quickly. Do you want me to drive you? There it was. Control, wrapped in kindness. I shook my head. No, I'll manage. I had been managing my entire life. I wasn't about to stop now. The first place I went was the bank. Not the one closest to the house. The one a few miles farther, where fewer people knew me personally. Old habits. Privacy matters more than convenience when things become delicate. The young man at the counter smiled politely. How can I help you today? I'd like to review all my accounts, I said, and make a few changes. He nodded, typing quickly. Of course. As he pulled everything up on the screen, I watched carefully. Savings, checking, investment accounts. Everything was still exactly as I had left it. Good. That meant they hadn't acted yet. They were waiting, planning, which meant I still had time. I'd like to transfer a portion of my funds, I said calmly, into a new account, one that only I have access to. He glanced up. Certainly. We can set that up right away. And I'd like to remove any authorized users from my existing accounts. That made him pause. All of them? Yes. Daniel had never abused that access. Not yet. But last night had made one thing very clear. Trust, once broken in your mind, should not be given the chance to break in reality. It took about an hour. An hour of signatures, confirmations, quiet decisions that would have looked insignificant to anyone else. But to me, it felt like laying the first stones of something solid. Something that belonged only to me. From there, I drove to another place I hadn't visited in years. A small law office just off Main Street. The name on the door hadn't changed. Neither had the man behind the desk, it seemed, just a little older, like me. Margaret Whitmore, he said with a surprised smile as I stepped inside. Well, this is unexpected. It's been a while, hasn't it, Robert? He gestured for me to sit. What can I do for you? I folded my hands neatly in my lap, the same way I had the night before. I'd like to review my will, I said. There's something about saying those words out loud that makes everything feel very real. Final. Structured. Controlled. Robert nodded slowly. Of course. Any particular changes in mind? Yes, I said. I didn't rush. I didn't ramble. I explained exactly what I wanted. Who would receive what? And more importantly, who wouldn't? He listened carefully, occasionally asking a question, making notes. When I finished, he leaned back slightly and studied me. This is a significant revision, he said. I'm aware. Are you sure this is what you want? I met his eyes without hesitation. I've never been more sure of anything. We went over property ownership next. The house. The one Daniel and Lindsay were already planning to sell. The one they believed would quietly pass into their control once I was relocated. I'd like to ensure there's no confusion about ownership, I said. Robert gave a small, knowing nod. We can make that very clear. Yes, very clear. By the time I left his office, the afternoon sun was lower in the sky. Everything was in motion now. Not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively. When I returned home, Lindsay was in the living room scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I walked in. Oh good, you're back, she said. I was starting to wonder. I smiled faintly. No need. She studied me for a moment, as if trying to read something beneath the surface. But there was nothing there for her to find. I had spent a lifetime learning how to keep my thoughts to myself. Did you get everything done? She asked. Yes, I said. Everything that mattered. That evening, Daniel came home later than usual. Tired. Distracted. He gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, the way he always had. Long day, he muttered. I'm sure, I replied gently. We sat at the dinner table together, the three of us, like any other night. Plates. Conversation. Routine. But beneath it all, something had shifted. They just didn't know it yet. Because while they were still planning how to move me out of my life, I had already begun removing them from it. Piece by piece. Quietly. Permanently. The next few days passed quietly. Too quietly. And that's how I knew I was right. When people are planning something behind your back, they become careful. Not distant enough to raise suspicion, but not natural either. It's subtle. A pause before answering a question. A glance exchanged when they think you're not looking. A conversation that ends just a second too quickly when you enter the room. And once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. Lindsay became attentive. Not warm. Not loving. Attentive. Do you need help with your laundry? Maybe you shouldn't be using the stairs so much. I read that people your age should have someone around more often. Always said with a gentle tone. Always delivered like concern. But underneath it, there was a script. I played my role just as carefully. Oh, I'm fine. I've managed this long. But thank you, dear. I even smiled when I said it. That seemed to reassure her. Because people like Lindsay don't just want control, they want agreement. Daniel, on the other hand, was unraveling in smaller ways. He lingered longer at work. He checked his phone more often. He avoided sitting too close to me at dinner. Guilt doesn't make people confess. It makes them retreat. On the fourth day after my birthday, I found the folder again. The one I had noticed on the kitchen counter that night. This time, it wasn't hidden. It was sitting right there on the dining table. Almost like someone had grown comfortable enough to stop pretending. I walked past it once. Twice. Then, on the third pass, I stopped. Just long enough to glance down. The top page was partially visible. Typed. Clean. Official. And there it was, Senior Living Admission Agreement. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. Seeing the title was enough. But I did notice one more thing. A name printed neatly. Beneath the header. Not mine. Not yet. But there was a blank space waiting. That evening, Lindsay brought it up for the first time. Not directly. Of course not. Daniel and I were talking, she said casually, setting plates on the table. About the future. I looked up from my seat. The future. She nodded, smiling. Just planning ahead. Making sure everyone is taken care of. Everyone. Such a generous word for something so specific. Daniel sat down across from me, rubbing the back of his neck. Mom, he started, we've just been thinking, maybe it would be good to have a little more support. For you. There it was. Soft. Careful. Packaged like kindness. I tilted my head slightly. Support. Yeah. Lindsay jumped in quickly. Somewhere with professionals. Activities. People your age. It might actually be really nice. Really nice. I almost admired how easily she said it. I let a small silence settle over the table. Just enough to make them uncomfortable. Then I nodded slowly. I see. That was all I gave them. No argument. No resistance. Just understanding. And that confused them. I could see it immediately. Lindsay's smile flickered. Just for a second. Daniel blinked. Like he had expected a much harder conversation. Because they were ready to persuade me. They weren't ready for me to agree. Well, Lindsay said, recovering. We don't have to decide anything right away. Of course not. You already had. That night, I made another call. This time, from my bedroom, with the door closed and the volume low. Hello. I'd like to inquire about short-term rentals, I said. The woman on the other end was friendly. Efficient. What kind of place are you looking for? Something quiet, I replied. Furnished. Immediate availability. How long were you thinking? I paused. Then I said, long enough. Over the next 2 days, I finalized everything. The new account was active. The legal documents were being processed. And now, I had somewhere to go. A small house about 40 miles away. Nothing extravagant. But it was mine. Temporary, perhaps. But mine. I didn't pack much at first. Just essentials. Clothes. Personal papers. A few photographs. Not the ones on display. The ones that actually mattered. Lindsay noticed, of course. She always noticed anything that shifted the balance. Are you reorganizing? She asked one afternoon, leaning against my bedroom door. I folded a sweater. Calmly. Something like that. She watched me for a moment longer than necessary. Trying to understand. Trying to stay ahead. But for the first time since she had entered my life. She wasn't. That night, as I placed a small stack of documents into my bag, I allowed myself a single, quiet thought. Not about revenge. Not about anger. But about timing. They thought they were preparing to move me out next month. They thought they were in control of the schedule. Of the decisions. Of me. But what they didn't realize was this. I wasn't waiting for their plan to happen. I was letting them get comfortable enough to never see mine coming. The house felt different after that conversation. Not louder. Not colder. Just staged. When people believe something is already decided, they stop hiding as much. They relax. And in that comfort, they reveal more than they intend to. Lindsay no longer hinted. She suggested. Openly. I found a place with a garden, she said one morning, scrolling through her phone while I sat across from her. You've always liked flowers. I looked at the screen briefly. Stock photos. Bright smiles. Elderly couples holding hands like they had all chosen to be there. Manufactured happiness. I'm sure it's lovely, I said. And I meant it. Lovely for someone else. Daniel started using different words too. Not if, but when. When you move, we can finally renovate the kitchen. When things are more settled, we'll visit you every weekend. Every weekend. It's interesting how easily people make promises about a future they don't truly intend to participate in. I nodded when appropriate, smiled when expected. And all the while, I continued. By the end of that week, nearly everything important had been moved quietly out of reach. Not physically, not yet, but legally, financially, irreversibly. The house, for example. That was the piece they cared about most. I could see it in the way Lindsay's eyes lingered on certain walls. The way she talked about opening up the space and modernizing the layout. She wasn't imagining my comfort. She was imagining her future. 2 days after our conversation at dinner, I received a call from Robert. Everything is in order, he said. The documents have been updated and filed. Thank you, I replied. There was a pause on the line. Margaret, he added carefully, if you don't mind. Me asking, is everything all right? I considered that for a moment. Then I said, it is now. That same afternoon, I made one final adjustment. Small, simple, but critical. I changed the locks on a storage unit I had rented years ago and almost forgotten about. It wasn't large, just enough space for a few boxes. But it gave me something invaluable, separation. A place where my belongings existed outside of their reach, their awareness, their assumptions. That night, I began packing properly. Still quietly. Still selectively. A suitcase in the closet. A few items missing from shelves that no one would notice immediately. I moved slowly, not out of hesitation, but precision. Because this wasn't about leaving in anger. This was about leaving correctly. On Friday evening, Lindsay suggested something new. We should go visit the place this weekend, she said brightly. Just to see it in person. I looked up from my book. The facility? Yes, she said. I think it would really help you feel more comfortable. Comfortable. That word again. Daniel watched me carefully, waiting, measuring my reaction, preparing, perhaps, to step in if I resisted. I closed my book gently and placed it on the table beside me. Then I said, that sounds like a good idea. They both froze. Not visibly, but I could feel it. That brief disruption of expectation. Really? Daniel asked. Yes, I said. If we're going to discuss it seriously, I should see it. Lindsay smiled quickly. Too quickly. Exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking. Of course it was. The visit was scheduled for Sunday morning. 2 days away. 2 days. That night, as the house settled into silence, I sat alone in the living room. The same room where I had raised my son. The same room where, just days earlier, I had been quietly erased from their future. I looked around slowly. At the furniture. The photographs. The life that had been built here, piece by piece, over decades. And I felt something I hadn't expected. Not grief. Not regret. Relief. Because once you see the truth clearly, there's a strange kind of freedom in it. You're no longer guessing. No longer hoping. No longer trying to fix something that was never what you believed it to be. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Before Lindsay. Before Daniel. Before the house could perform its usual illusion of normalcy. I made my coffee, sat at the table, and pulled out a small envelope I had prepared the night before. Inside it was a letter. Short. Precise. Final. I didn't seal it yet. Not because I was unsure, but because timing matters. Sunday was their plan. Their reveal. Their moment of control. But mine would come first. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back into the envelope. Then I set it aside and finished my coffee in silence. In the other room, I could hear Lindsay starting to move around. Cabinet doors opening. Footsteps. The beginning of another carefully managed day. I stood up, rinsed my cup, and looked out the window one last time. They thought they were preparing to take me somewhere I didn't choose. They thought they had 2 more days to arrange everything. To guide me, gently, into the life they had already decided for me. But what they didn't understand was this. I wasn't going to wait until Sunday. I had already chosen my day, and it wasn't theirs. I left the house on Saturday morning. Not Sunday. Not the day they had planned to walk me through hallways with pastel walls and polite smiles. I chose the day before. Timing isn't just about being early. It's about being unexpected. The house was still quiet when I stepped out of my bedroom. 6:10 a.m. Too early for Lindsay. Too early even for Daniel on a weekend. Exactly right for me. I didn't rush. That's important. People imagine moments like this as frantic, grabbing bags, rushing out the door, heart racing. But that's not how control works. Control is calm, measured, intentional. I carried one suitcase down the hallway. Not large, not dramatic, just enough for what I needed immediately. Everything else had already been handled. The envelope sat on the kitchen table where I had left it. Centered. Impossible to miss. For a moment, I stood there looking at it. Not second-guessing. Just acknowledging the end of something. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out a pen, and wrote 2 names on the front. Daniel and Lindsay, no love. No dear. Just names. I placed the pen beside it, adjusted the envelope slightly so it sat straight, and turned toward the door. I didn't look back. Not at the hallway. Not at the living room. Not at the life I had spent decades building. Because I wasn't losing it. I was choosing to leave it behind. The drive took just under an hour. 40 miles of quiet roads. Early morning light stretching across empty intersections and still neighborhoods. I had driven those roads before, years ago, without thinking much of them. That morning, every mile felt deliberate. The small house I had rented sat at the end of a quiet street. Nothing remarkable. No grand entrance. No manicured gardens. But it had something far more valuable. Privacy. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a moment, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. No voices. No expectations. No one waiting inside to tell me where I belonged. Just silence. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like peace. Inside, the space was simple. Furnished, just as promised. A small living room. A clean kitchen. A bedroom with sunlight coming through the window at just the right angle. I set my suitcase down by the door and walked slowly through each room. Not inspecting. Claiming. This will do. I said quietly to myself. And it would. Back at the house, I knew exactly what would be happening. Not yet. But soon. Lindsay would wake first. She always did on weekends. She'd make coffee. Check her phone. Move through the house like she owned it already. Then she would see the envelope. I imagined the pause. The slight confusion. Then the decision to open it. Daniel would still be asleep when she read it. But not for long. Because what I had written inside wasn't something she could handle alone. The letter was simple. Just like everything else I had done. Daniel, I heard everything. The plans. The timeline. The assumptions. You don't need to worry about finding a place for me. I've already found one for myself. No anger. No accusations. Just truth. As of this week, all financial accounts have been updated. All access has been removed. The house remains in my name, and any decisions regarding it will be made solely by me. Clear. Unmistakable. You wanted me to leave. So I did. And then the only line that really mattered, but not empty-handed. I didn't need to threaten them. I didn't need to explain everything. The absence itself would do that. Back in my new kitchen, I made myself another cup of coffee. Different mug. Different light. Same quiet control. I didn't turn my phone on right away. I knew there would be calls. Messages. Questions that weren't really questions. Where are you? Why didn't you say anything? What is this about? But all of those questions had already been answered. They just hadn't been listening when it mattered. Around 9:30 a.m., I finally turned the phone on. It didn't take long. 3 missed calls. Then 5. Then 10. Daniel's name filled the screen. Lindsay's right behind it. A voicemail came through. Then another. Then a message. Mom, please call me. We need to talk. I looked at the screen for a few seconds. Then I set the phone down on the counter. Because for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't the one who needed to talk. They had made their plans. They had chosen their timing. They had decided what my life would look like without ever asking me. And now, they were finally experiencing what that felt like. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just gone. By noon, I knew they had read the letter. Not because they told me, but because the calls stopped. Silence like that doesn't happen by accident. It happens when people are no longer reacting and start thinking. Around 12:47 p.m., my phone rang again. This time, I answered. Mom. Daniel's voice sounded different. Not rushed. Not defensive. Unsteady. I'm here, I said calmly. A pause. Then, where are you? I walked over to the window, looking out at the quiet street. I'm somewhere safe, I replied. That's not. He stopped himself, exhaled. Mom, what is going on? There it was. The question people ask when control slips out of their hands. I believe I explained everything in the letter, I said. You didn't explain anything, he said quickly. You just left. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, yes. Another pause. Longer this time. Lindsay's really upset, he added. Of course she was. This wasn't how her plan was supposed to go. I imagine she is, I said. Mom, we weren't trying to hurt you, Daniel continued. We were just thinking about what's best. What's best? It's a phrase people use when they've already made a decision for someone else. For who? I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Because there wasn't a good answer. We were worried about you, he said finally. You're alone a lot. The house is big. It's not practical anymore. Practical. Another careful word. I see, I said. And I did. More clearly than he realized. Mom, can you at least tell me where you are? He asked. We should talk about this in person. I turned away from the window and sat down at the small kitchen table. No, I said gently. That word hit harder than anything else I could have said. No, why not? Because you didn't offer me that same courtesy. Because you planned my future without me sitting at the table. Because you were ready to move me out of my life as if I were an inconvenience to be managed. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I said, because there's nothing left to discuss. His breathing changed slightly on the other end. Faster. Tighter. That's not fair, he said. Fair. I almost smiled. Daniel, I said, my voice steady. You made arrangements for me to leave my home without asking me if I wanted to go. Silence. You discussed timelines. Facilities. Paperwork. Another pause. And now you'd like to have a conversation about fairness? He didn't respond. Because now, he understood that I knew everything. I wasn't going to let it get that far, he said finally, but the confidence in his voice was gone. That was the first honest thing he'd said. You already did, I replied. In the background, I could hear movement. A door closing. Then Lindsay's voice, faint but sharp. Is she on the phone? Daniel lowered his voice. Yeah. Put her on speaker. I waited. A second later, her voice came through clearly. Margaret, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Of course there had. Just not the kind she meant. I don't believe there has, I said. We were only trying to help, she continued, her tone carefully measured again. You heard part of a conversation and jumped to conclusions. Part of a conversation. Interesting. I heard enough, I said. You heard a plan we hadn't even discussed with you yet, she corrected. That's very different. There it was. The justification. We were going to include you, she added. Include me. In my own life. I let the silence stretch just a little longer this time. Long enough for discomfort to settle in on their side of the line. Then I said, you included me in a toast. Neither of them spoke. And I listened very carefully. Lindsay exhaled sharply. That was a joke. No, I said calmly. It wasn't. Another silence. Because now we were no longer discussing plans. We were discussing truth. Margaret, she said, her patience thinning. You're overreacting. Leaving like this, cutting off access to accounts. Do you understand how extreme that is? I leaned back slightly in my chair. Yes, I said. I do. And you still think this is reasonable? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush. I think, I said, it is necessary. That word landed differently. Heavier. For what? Daniel asked quietly. I looked around the small kitchen again. The sunlight. The stillness. The absence of pressure. For me, I said. No one spoke after that. Not immediately. Because for the first time in this entire situation, I wasn't responding to their decisions. I was standing inside my own. Finally, Daniel said, softer now, Mom, please come home. Home. I closed my eyes for a brief second. Then I opened them again and said, I already am. After the call ended, the house, my new house, felt even quieter than before. Not empty. Settled. There's a difference. Empty feels like something is missing. Settled feels like something has finally stopped moving. I placed my phone face down on the table and didn't touch it again for the rest of the afternoon. Not because I was avoiding them, but because I had already said everything that needed to be said. When people lose control of a situation, they go through phases. First confusion, then denial, then urgency. By early evening, they reached the next one. Pressure. The messages started again. Not calls this time. Texts. Short at first. Daniel, Mom, please. Let's just talk calmly. Then a few minutes later, Daniel, we can figure this out together. Together. I read the words without reacting. Because together only seems appealing when it's offered after the decisions have already been made. A few minutes later, a new message appeared. This time from Lindsay. Lindsay, this has gone too far. I almost smiled at that. Too far. Not when they planned my removal. Not when they discussed selling my home. Not when they laughed at the idea of placing me somewhere convenient. But now it was too far. I didn't respond. Silence, when used correctly, isn't avoidance. It's positioning. That night, I slept deeply. The kind of sleep that doesn't come from exhaustion, but from resolution. The next morning, Sunday, the day they had planned to take me to the facility, I woke up without an alarm. No schedule waiting for me. No one knocking on the door. No one managing my time. Just sunlight and quiet. I made breakfast slowly. Eggs, toast, coffee. Sat at the small table and ate without distraction. And somewhere, about 40 miles away, I knew exactly what was happening. They were getting ready. Expecting me to be there. Preparing to guide me through a place I had never chosen. Until they realized I wasn't coming. At 10:12 a.m., my phone rang again. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. This time, it wasn't Daniel. Margaret, Lindsay said, her voice tight. No, Mom. Interesting. Yes. I replied. We're here, she said. At the facility. Of course you are. They're expecting us, she continued. We had an appointment. I took a slow sip of my coffee before responding. I see. A pause. Then, sharper, where are you? Same question. Different tone. I told Daniel yesterday, I said calmly. I'm somewhere else. That's not acceptable, she snapped. There it was. The mask slipping. I didn't respond immediately. I let her hear her own words settle in the silence. Then I said, it doesn't need to be. You've embarrassed us, she continued, her voice rising. Do you understand that? We scheduled this, we showed up, and now, what are we supposed to tell them? I set my cup down gently. The truth would be a good place to start, I said. Another pause. Heavier this time. You're being unreasonable, she said. Unreasonable. That word again. I don't believe I am, I replied. You can't just disappear and expect everything to be fine, she said. I leaned back slightly in my chair. I didn't disappear, I said. I relocated. That's not the point, she snapped. No, it wasn't. The point was that I had removed myself from their control, and they didn't know how to function without it. Margaret, she said, trying to regain composure. We are trying to help you. This place is good. It's safe. It's what you need. What I need. I looked around my small, quiet kitchen again. Everything in its place. Everything chosen by me. I'm all ready. Somewhere safe, I said. That's not the same, she insisted. No, I agreed. It's not. Because safety without freedom isn't safety. It's control. I could hear voices in the background. Staff, perhaps. Polite. Waiting. Expecting an elderly woman who would arrive, smile nervously, and sign whatever was placed in front of her. That woman didn't exist anymore. You need to come here, Lindsay said firmly. Need. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see it. No, I said. Silence. Sharp. Immediate. You don't have a choice, she replied. And that was the moment everything became perfectly clear. I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm, steady, unmistakable. I already made one. Nothing on the other end. No argument. No quick response. Because there's something about certainty that stops people mid-thought. You can't just cut us out like this, she said finally, but the confidence was gone now. I didn't answer that directly. Instead, I said, you made plans for my life without me. A pause. I'm simply living it without you. And before she could respond, before she could reshape the conversation, redirect it, soften it, I ended the call. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but because the conversation was over. And for the first time since all of this began, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was deciding. Sunday afternoon arrived with the kind of calm that felt almost deliberate. Not the kind of quiet that makes you nervous, but the kind that confirms you are exactly where you should be. I spent the morning arranging my things in the small house. Books on the shelves, photographs on the wall, a few personal touches that made the space feel lived in. Nothing extravagant, nothing flashy, just mine. By noon, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. The streets were empty. A few joggers. A dog walker with a golden retriever. Birds in the trees. No schedules. No expectations. No one waiting for me to react. I returned home around 1 p.m. coffee in hand. I sat at the table and let myself think clearly for the first time in weeks. The situation with Daniel and Lindsay had unfolded exactly as I suspected. They thought they had time. They thought I would comply. They underestimated me. I began to make a plan, not for retaliation, not yet, but to ensure I stayed ahead. Step 1, complete control of my finances. Already done. Step 2, secure all legal documents. Already done. Step 3, establish a safe, independent place to live. Done. Now came the subtle part. Ensuring that they fully realized the consequences of their choices without resorting to anger or confrontation. I made a quick list in my notebook. Keep communication calm, but firm. Allow them to discover the truth gradually. Avoid unnecessary explanations. Maintain full control of timing. Ensure their expectations continue to clash with reality. I paused and smiled slightly. The tension between expectation and reality is one of the most powerful tools you can have. Around 2:30 p.m., my phone buzzed again. A text from Daniel. Mom, please. Can we meet somewhere neutral? We need to talk. I read it carefully. Neutral. Interesting choice of words. I replied simply. I'm not available. We'll communicate when necessary. Another text followed 5 minutes later. Mom, this isn't just about the house. We want to help you. I set the phone down without replying. Help. Another carefully chosen word to disguise control. By 4 p.m., I was ready to finalize the next part of my plan. I contacted the movers I had booked earlier in the week for a small delivery. Not much, just essentials, personal items, and a few important boxes from storage. Everything was scheduled to arrive within the hour. I prepared tea while waiting, enjoying the quiet hum of a small electric kettle. The calmness of this day contrasted sharply with the tension I knew was building miles away at my old house. Lindsay and Daniel would be realizing soon that the timeline they had designed no longer applied. At 5:15 p.m., the movers arrived. I supervised quietly, giving only necessary instructions. Boxes placed in the correct rooms. Furniture adjusted slightly. All in silence. By 6 p.m., the last box was set, and I took a moment to sit in the living room. The sunlight from the west-facing window cast a warm glow across the space. I sipped my tea and allowed myself to think freely. Freedom is a peculiar sensation. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention. It is quiet, steady, and completely yours. Later that evening, as the sky began to darken, I received a single phone call. From Daniel. Mom. Yes, I said. I don't understand, He began, voice tight. You're gone. How did you manage this so quickly? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I let the silence speak. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, firm, and clear. I never needed to hurry. I only needed to plan. And now, everything is as it should be. He hesitated. Mom, Daniel, I interrupted softly. This is not about anger. This is about clarity, about truth, about taking control of my own life. He said nothing, and in that silence, I knew he understood. Later that night, I sat in the quiet house, looking out at the dimming sky. No one to dictate my movements. No one to dictate my decisions. I had removed myself from their plans, but not in haste or panic. I had done it deliberately, calmly, and with full awareness. And for the first time in many years, I felt completely in control, completely free. Sunday evening ended quietly, with the house bathed in the soft glow of lamplight. I poured myself another cup of tea, placed it on the table, and allowed myself a deep, steady breath. Tomorrow, they would wake to a new reality. A reality where I was no longer an option to manage or manipulate. A reality where I had already decided everything important. And that was the most satisfying moment of all. The next morning, I woke to the soft hum of the heater and the quiet chirping of birds outside the window. It was Monday, the day Lindsay and Daniel had fully expected me to be complying with their schedule. I made breakfast slowly, deliberately, enjoying the freedom of choosing exactly what I wanted: scrambled eggs, buttered toast, and a cup of strong coffee. No interruptions. No directives. No forced smiles. Around 9 a.m., my phone buzzed. Another text from Daniel. Mom, please. You can't just ignore us forever. Let's at least meet for coffee. Somewhere neutral. I read it and set the phone down. Neutral. A careful word meant to lure me into compromise. I didn't reply. Instead, I poured another cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the suburban streets come alive with the routine of morning commuters and joggers. The quiet control of the moment felt almost sacred. By 10:30 a.m., I had begun the next phase. I opened my laptop and reviewed the legal documents once more. The will, property ownership, financial accounts. Everything was exactly as I had arranged it. Every detail, carefully documented, legally binding, and completely inaccessible to anyone else. A knock on the door startled me slightly. Not from anyone I knew. Just the delivery of a small package I had ordered earlier in the week. Inside was a filing cabinet lockbox, sturdy, small, and perfect for securing sensitive documents that might need to travel with me in the future. As I secured the first of my important papers inside, my mind wandered briefly to the old house, the one I had left behind. I imagined Lindsay discovering the envelope, reading my words slowly, the growing realization spreading across her face. Daniel pacing the living room, running a hand through his hair. The shock of their expectations clashing with reality. That thought made me smile softly. Not cruelly, just satisfied. By noon, I was ready to leave the house for a short walk in the neighborhood. I needed fresh air, movement, and a reminder that the life I was living now was mine entirely. The streets were empty, save for a jogger with a golden retriever. I waved, they waved back. Simple interactions. Neutral, comfortable. I walked slowly, aware of each step, the control I had over my own schedule. Freedom, after all, is measured in small, deliberate choices. Returning home, I checked my messages again. Multiple texts from Daniel. A few from Lindsay. All asking variations of the same question. Where are you? Why aren't you responding? Please, we need to talk. I ignored them. Because communication without control is meaningless. By 3 p.m., I prepared a small lunch for myself, taking the time to set the table as I preferred. I noticed the difference immediately. No one to rush me. No one to dictate portion sizes. No one to comment on my choices. After lunch, I took out my journal and began writing. Not letters. Not angry notes. Not explanations. Just observations, thoughts, and reminders for myself. I am safe. I am in control. I decide what matters. Around 5 p.m., I received another call from Daniel. This time, his voice was quieter, hesitant. Mom, he started. We don't understand. You left. We need to talk. I leaned back in my chair, calm and deliberate. Daniel, I said evenly, you made decisions about my life without me. I am now making decisions about my life with full awareness. That is the difference. A pause. Then he said, "But we didn't mean—" "I know," I interrupted softly. "Intentions don't matter when actions override choice. You plan my life. I am living it." The silence on the other end was palpable, because at that moment, they understood exactly what had shifted. I hung up, not angrily, not vindicatively, but definitively. I turned back to the window and watched the late afternoon sunlight spill across the street. It was peaceful. It was deliberate. It was mine. And in that quiet moment, I realized the most important truth. Freedom isn't taken. It isn't granted. It's claimed. And now, after years of compromise, sacrifice, and silent endurance, I had claimed it fully. No interruptions. No manipulations. Just the clear, steady knowledge that my life, every choice, every space, every moment, was once again completely under my control. The phone remained silent for the next few hours. I didn't check it. I didn't need to. By evening, the small house was bathed in a golden glow from the west-facing windows. I made tea, sat at the table, and watched the light move across the walls. And for the first time in decades, I felt entirely, beautifully free. The evening settled over my small house with a quiet certainty. Everything was in place. Every document secured. Every essential packed. I'm safe. I am in control. And those 3 statements were enough. Around 8 p.m., I prepared a small dinner. Grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, a simple salad. I placed the plate carefully on the table, savoring the quiet rhythm of cooking for myself. No interference. No critique. No implied instructions about portion sizes or habits. During dinner, I reflected on the pattern that had emerged over the past few days. Misjudgment of my will and intentions. Underestimation of my ability to act calmly and decisively. Overconfidence in control that was never truly theirs to have. Each step I had taken was deliberate. House was bathed in the soft glow of lamplight. The tea I had left cooling on the table now steamed faintly in the still air. For the first time in decades, I felt entirely autonomous. Entirely in control. Entirely free. No longer measured against their schedules, expectations, or plans. No longer subject to the assumptions of those who believed they knew what was best for me. I had taken my life back piece by piece. Quietly. Deliberately. Methodically. And that, above all, made every calculated move, every ignored message, every secured document, worth it. That night, I went to bed knowing one simple truth. I was home. But this time, it was on my terms. Completely. The next day would bring its own challenges. Calls. Questions. Perhaps even arguments. But they would all be handled in the same way. Calmly, firmly, and with the full awareness that I was no longer anyone's subject. I had reclaimed my life. And nothing, not their plans, not their expectations, could take it from me again. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of a new beginning. The small house was quiet, the sunlight spilling across the floors, the furniture settled in its proper place. I had slept deeply, waking not to an alarm but to my own rhythm. I made coffee and sat at the table, reviewing the journal I had begun a few days ago. The entries were simple, methodical, and deeply personal. I am safe. I am in control. I am free. These 3 statements had become my anchor. Around 8:30 a.m., my phone buzzed again. "Daniel." "Mom, please answer. We need to understand what's happening." I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I prepared breakfast. Scrambled eggs, lightly buttered toast, and a cup of strong coffee. I took my time, enjoying the small routine that was entirely mine. At 9 a.m., I finally answered. "Yes," I said, calm and deliberate. "Margaret, please. We just want to talk," Daniel said, voice tight. "We didn't expect this to happen so fast." I planned deliberately. I replied evenly. I acted calmly. And now, everything important is under my control. Another pause. Then, we didn't mean to hurt you. We were only thinking about your safety. Safety. Another word they used to justify their control. I am safe, I said. And now I am in control of my life. That is what matters. Daniel sighed. I understand that you're serious, he said softly. Yes, I said simply. There was silence for a long moment. A silence that felt heavy on their end, light on mine. I think we need to come to terms with this, Daniel said finally. We need to talk about the house, about accounts, everything. I leaned back in my chair, calm, composed. You will, I said. On my terms. Lindsay's voice appeared faintly in the background. Daniel, maybe we should let her, her sentence faltered. She realized immediately that this wasn't negotiation. This wasn't persuasion. This was finality. I set the phone aside for a moment, watching the sunlight shift across the floor. Everything about this house, this moment, was deliberate, controlled, mine. By noon, I made a simple lunch, again enjoying the freedom of choosing what I wanted without interference. Small pleasures, simple choices, felt monumental after decades of accommodation. Mid-afternoon brought another set of messages. Daniel and Lindsay, both trying, subtly, to re-establish some form of influence. Mom, please. We can make this work together. Together. The same word again. I smiled faintly. Not at the message, but at the audacity. I replied calmly, not defensively, not angrily. I am already making it work. Without interference. Without compromise. The line went quiet. That evening, I took a walk in the quiet streets around the neighborhood. Suburban calm, sunlight fading into early dusk, birds returning to nests, joggers finishing their routines. I moved slowly, deliberately, savoring each step, each breath. When I returned, I checked my journal once more. The simple statements remained. I am safe. I am in control. I am free. They were not just words. They were a declaration. By 7 p.m., I had begun organizing the documents I would keep with me at all times. Copies of the will, financial records, and legal notices, all meticulously arranged. The phone buzzed again. Another text from Daniel. Mom, please. Can we see you tomorrow? It's important. I read it, then set the phone aside. Not out of spite, but because urgency has no meaning when the decisions are already made. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat at the table, and looked out the window at the quiet street. Everything felt deliberate, controlled, calm. The final realizations settled over me like a warm blanket. They had underestimated my patience, my composure, and my ability to plan. They had assumed compliance. And, instead, they found autonomy. That night, as darkness settled, I sat in the living room with my tea, my journal, and the quiet knowledge that my life was mine entirely. Every choice, every space, every moment under my control. Completely. I had reclaimed what was taken for granted. And nothing, not their plans, not their assumptions, not their expectations, could undo it. For the first time in decades, I was fully, completely free. The morning light filtered gently through the curtains of my small, quiet house, illuminating a space that finally felt fully mine. For the first time in decades, there was no schedule imposed, no plans made for me without consent, no expectation of obedience. I brewed my coffee slowly, savoring the aroma, and sat at the kitchen table. Noticing the sunlight on the tabletop, I reflected on everything that had happened, the birthday toast, the whispered plans, the hidden documents, and finally the deliberate actions I had taken to reclaim my life. I thought of Daniel, not with anger, not with resentment, but with a quiet understanding of human frailty. He had acted out of habit, out of love distorted by control. He had wanted to protect me in his own way, but protection had been disguised as restriction, as manipulation, as the assumption that he knew what was best. Lindsay, too, crossed my mind. Her charm, her smile, her carefully chosen words, all attempts to manage my life under the guise of care. I felt no triumph over her, only clarity. I walked through my small home, touching familiar surfaces and appreciating the subtle details I had chosen. The sunlight through the west-facing windows, the neatly arranged books, the quiet corners just for me. Each element was a reminder of autonomy. By midday, I prepared a simple lunch and sat by the window, watching the neighborhood quietly move through its routines. The joggers, the dog walkers, the occasional cyclist, they were all part of a world that moved forward without commanding me to follow their pace. I picked up my phone and saw the messages piling up from Daniel and Lindsay. Missed calls, texts, pleas to meet, explanations, apologies. I read each one calmly. Each word reinforced the truth I had embraced. My life was no longer theirs to shape. Finally, I sent a single text. I am safe. I am free. I will contact you when I choose. Please respect my space. No more, no less. The silence that followed felt different than before. It was not empty. It was a space filled with dignity, with self-possession, with peace. Later that afternoon, I sat in the living room, a book in my lap, the sunlight fading into the warm glow of evening. I closed my eyes briefly and allowed myself a moment to truly feel it. The culmination of weeks of quiet observation, deliberate planning, and thoughtful action. I had taken back what was mine, my home, my finances, my schedule, my autonomy. I had done it without anger, without haste, without spectacle, just deliberate, calm, and steady resolve. And in that stillness, I realized the most important truth. Freedom is not given. It is claimed. And once claimed, nothing can take it away. That night, as the house settled into quiet darkness, I brewed another cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the stars begin to appear. For the first time in a very long time, I felt complete. Whole. Daniel and Lindsay would eventually adjust. They would eventually understand that their assumptions had no power over me anymore. But I no longer needed their understanding. I had lived decades thinking I owed patience and compromise, sacrificing myself for appearances of harmony. Now I understood. My life, my choices, my dignity were not negotiable. I closed my eyes and smiled softly, feeling the weight of all those years lift. The house was quiet. The night was calm. And I, at last, was entirely free. A chapter of endurance, betrayal, and quiet triumph had closed. And the next chapter, written entirely by me, was beginning.